I pulled over before she even finished her sentence. My daughter was sitting on a bench outside the Loblaws on Dunbar Street, 2 garbage bags beside her, and my granddaughter asleep across her lap. It was a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of cold that doesn't warn you first. I had been on my way to my accountant's office. I had a 9 o'clock. I canceled it before I even got out of the car. She looked up when she heard my door. Her face. I don't have the words for what I saw in her face. She was 34 years old, and she looked like she was 12 again, the year her father left. That same expression. Like she'd been dropped somewhere unfamiliar and was waiting for someone to come tell her the rules. "Mom," she said. That was all. I looked at the bags. I looked at my granddaughter, who was 4 and still had her pajama top on under her coat. I looked at my daughter's hands, which were shaking even though she was pressing them flat against her knees to stop it. "Get up," I said. "Both of you. We're going." She started to explain. I told her she could explain in the car. My granddaughter woke up when I lifted her. She blinked at me with those enormous brown eyes, the ones she got from her father's side, which I had always privately considered wasted on that family. "Grandma," she said, "where are we going?" "Home," I said. "My home." My daughter was quiet for most of the drive. She held the bags in her lap because the trunk was full of the autumn containers I'd been meaning to swap out for weeks. Eventually she said, "He said I had to be out by 9. I said, "Who said?" "His father." I kept my eyes on the road. "And where was your husband during this?" She didn't answer right away. "He agreed with him." I turned onto Oak Street and didn't say anything. I was 63 years old. I had built a property management company from 4 rental units and a line of credit I'd taken out against my condo in 1998. I had navigated 2 recessions, a divorce, a breast cancer diagnosis in 2017 that I did not tell my daughter about until after my final clear scan, and a CRA audit that my accountant still refers to as the bad year. I was not going to cry in the car, but I wanted to. I want to be honest about that part. Because I think when women my age talk about being strong, we sometimes skip over the 5 minutes where we were just a mother sitting in a car trying not to fall apart. I loved my son-in-law once. I thought he was steady. I thought he came from people who valued family. I had stood at that wedding with my hand on my daughter's arm and actually believed the things I was thinking. I had been wrong about that. She told me everything over tea. My granddaughter was in the living room with the television on, low enough that we could talk. My son-in-law's family owned a mid-sized commercial landscaping company in Burnaby. My daughter had worked there for 6 years. She had started in accounts receivable, moved into operations coordination, and for the last 2 years had been managing their largest municipal conson. The kind of work that keeps a company's lights on. She had been good at it. She had been, from what I could tell, the most competent person in that building. Her father-in-law had called her into his office 3 weeks ago and told her she was being let go. He had called it a restructuring. He had given her 2 weeks of severance, which in British Columbia for 6 years of service was not remotely legal, but she hadn't known that yet. She told me he'd said something during that meeting that she'd been turning over ever since. He said the company was a family business and it needed to stay that way. He said some people weren't built for certain rooms. She hadn't understood what he meant. I understood immediately. She went home that day and told her husband. He told her his father had the right to make decisions about the business. She said she thought she'd earned her place there. He said she'd been an employee, not a partner. She said she felt the ground shifting under her even as they spoke. That night, he told her his father had also been talking about the house they lived in, which his family owned, and which they rented at below market rate as a kind of informal arrangement. He said his father was asking them to revisit the arrangement. Within 3 weeks, she was out. My granddaughter had started asking questions about going home that my daughter didn't know how to answer. So, she'd packed what she could, told my granddaughter they were going on an adventure, and sat on that bench because she didn't know what else to do. She told me she hadn't called me sooner because she'd been trying to fix it herself. She'd been trying to be reasonable. She said the word reasonable with such a particular tiredness that I recognized it immediately. It's the word women use when they're trying to manage a situation that was never actually theirs to manage. I put my hand over hers. "Okay," I said. "Okay, what?" "Okay, now I know. Now we can begin." She looked at me with the expression I'd been seeing since she was 7 years old. Half trust, half terror. I called my lawyer the next morning. She had been my lawyer for 11 years. She was the kind of woman who answered her own phone before 9 a.m., and I had always appreciated that about her. I explained the situation, the wrongful dismissal, the inadequate severance, the housing situation. She asked a few questions, took some notes, and then said something I'd been waiting to hear. 6 years in a management role on municipal contracts. Do you know what documentation your daughter kept? My daughter, as it turned out, had kept everything. Emails, performance reviews that her father-in-law had written before he decided she was a liability. Copies of the contracts she'd managed. Internal communications. She was meticulous. She always had been, even as a teenager, the kind of person who saved receipts and filed things and remembered exact dates. My lawyer said we had a strong case for wrongful dismissal and likely a case for constructive dismissal under the BC Employment Standards Act. The severance alone was significantly under what she was owed. She said, we could also look at the housing situation, depending on how the informal tenancy had been documented. I told her to begin. The next thing I did was something I hadn't told my daughter about yet. I had a company. A property management company with 12 residential units and 3 small commercial properties, mostly in East Van and Burnaby. It wasn't a large operation, but it was mine completely with no debt against it. I had spent 25 years making it solid. The landscaping company that my son-in-law's family owned held contracts with 3 municipalities. I knew this because my daughter had mentioned it over the years. I also knew, because I had been in business long enough to understand how these things worked, that municipal contracts were public record. I started reading. Over the next 2 weeks, while my daughter settled in and my granddaughter started at a new daycare 2 blocks from my house, I read every publicly available contract document I could find for that company. I cross-referenced their registered business address, their GST number, their listed principals. Then I made a few phone calls. I was 63 years old. I had been in property management in the Lower Mainland for a quarter-century. I knew people. I knew people who knew people. That's not a boast. It's just what time does if you show up consistently and treat people decently. One of those people was on the board of a commercial property association that I won't name here. He told me something interesting. The Steenty, the landscaping company, had been awarded a contract renewal the previous spring for municipal park maintenance in one district. The renewal had gone through quickly. There were 2 other bidders. The other bids had both come in lower. I wrote that down. I also had a conversation with a woman I knew from a property investors group I'd been part of for years. She knew the family peripherally. She said that the father-in-law had a reputation. Not a legal one, just a reputation. The kind that gets talked about quietly at industry lunches. He'd pushed out a partner in the late 90s. There had been a non-disclosure agreement. He'd let go of a bookkeeper 2 years ago, under circumstances nobody fully understood. I filed that away too. My daughter found a job. She did it herself. I want to be clear about that. She found a property development firm sent in New Westminster that was looking for someone with exactly her background in contract coordination, and she applied, and she got it. She started the first week of November. She took the bus because we were sharing my car, and I told her to take it. But she said the bus was fine. She took the bus, and she started her job, and she picked up my granddaughter at 4:30, and she made dinner 3 nights a week. And I started to see something returning to her face that I'd been missing since I'd found her on that bench. But the work wasn't done. My lawyer filed the wrongful dismissal claim in November. The company's initial response was dismissive. Their lawyer sent a letter suggesting my daughter had been a short-term contract employee, which was factually false and contradicted by their own documentation, and that the severance offered was appropriate. My lawyer responded with my daughter's performance reviews, her 6 years of tax slips, and a summary of the municipal contracts she had personally managed. We did not hear back for 3 weeks. Then we heard back with a settlement offer. It was better than the first severance, but still below what was owed. My lawyer advised rejecting it. We rejected it. My son-in-law called me during this period. I hadn't spoken to him since October. He called from a number I didn't recognize, which told me he knew I wouldn't pick up if I saw his name. I picked up anyway. He said he wanted to talk. He said things had gotten out of hand. He said his father had been under a lot of pressure, and he hoped I could understand. He said he missed my granddaughter. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Your daughter misses you too. She asks about you. Do you know what I tell her?" He was quiet. "I tell her that you love her, because I think that might still be true and I won't take that from a child." I paused. "But I can't have this conversation with you right now. Speak to your lawyer." I hung up. My hands were steady. I noticed that. They'd been steady since October. I think when you finally stop managing a situation and start moving through it, the shaking stops. In December, something else came to my attention. My daughter had been going through her old work emails, the ones she'd saved, in preparation for the legal proceedings. She found something she hadn't thought much about when it happened, but that looked different now. An email chain from 8 months before she was let go. Her father-in-law, her husband, and the company's outside accountant. A discussion about restructuring the municipal contracts under a new numbered company. My daughter had been CC'd briefly. She hadn't registered it at the time. I sent it to my lawyer. My lawyer said nothing to me for 48 hours. Then she called me on a Saturday morning and said, "I've been talking to a colleague. This may be more complicated than a wrongful dismissal." She referred me to a second lawyer who specialized in corporate and commercial matters. I met with him the following week. He was younger than I expected, methodical, the kind of person who organized his desk by type of document. I liked him immediately. He reviewed what we had. He said the numbered company restructuring, if done for the purpose of stripping assets or obfuscating contract revenue, could have implications beyond the employment claim. He said the municipal contract procurement process was worth looking at more closely. He said he would need more information before he could say anything definitive, but that what we had was worth examining. I told him to examine it. January was quiet from the outside. My granddaughter learned to skate at the rink on 41st. My daughter bought herself a good winter coat for the first time in years. We had Christmas with my sister and her family, and for one full day, everyone talked about ordinary things, and I let myself simply be there in it. But underneath, things were moving. The corporate lawyer had engaged a forensic accountant. I paid for this. I want to be transparent about that. It cost money, and I had money, and I used it. I think sometimes there's a false modesty about that. I had worked for 25 years so that I could spend that money when it mattered. This mattered. The forensic accountant found discrepancies. Not enormous ones, not dramatic ones, the kind that are designed not to be obvious. Revenue allocated to the numbered company that should have stayed in the parent company. Payments to contractors that didn't appear to have corresponding services. A municipal contract renewal that had been awarded at a rate higher than the lowest bid without documented justification. In February, my corporate lawyer made a referral to the appropriate provincial body that oversees commercial procurement in BC. I want to be careful about what I say here because some of this is still ongoing. But a referral was made. Documents were submitted. The process that was set in motion was not one I controlled or directed after a certain point. The employment settlement was reached in March. My daughter received 14 weeks of additional severance beyond what had originally been offered, plus a formal letter of reference and a payment in lieu of proper notice. It was not everything, but it was fair, and more importantly, it was documented. It was on paper. It existed. She cried when her lawyer called to confirm it. She was in my kitchen, and she cried, and my granddaughter came in from the other room and asked why Mummy was crying, and my daughter picked her up and said, "Happy reasons. Sometimes people cry for happy reasons." My granddaughter thought about this very seriously. Then she said, "Like when you cry at that commercial with the dog?" My daughter laughed until she couldn't breathe. I stepped out onto the back porch and stood there for a while. It was March in Vancouver, so it was raining, which felt appropriate. The cedar in the back corner was doing that thing it does in spring, where the new growth comes in almost yellow before it's 7. I had planted that tree when my daughter was 7. She used to climb it until she couldn't anymore, until she got too big, and then she used to just sit under it. I thought about the man who had put her on a park bench with 2 garbage bags. I thought about all the small calculations he must have made about who she was and what she was worth and what he could do without consequence. I thought about how certain men develop a very precise blindness to the full dimension of the people around them, how they mistake quiet for weakness, how they mistake accommodation for absence of options. I had been quiet for 63 years. Quiet didn't mean empty. My son-in-law's father has not been charged with anything. I want to be clear about that. What has happened is that a municipal contract his company held was not renewed in the spring cycle, and that a procurement review was initiated that his company will be required to participate in. I don't know where that ends. It's not mine to know. I handed it to the people whose job it is, and I stepped back. My son-in-law and my daughter are not reconciled. I don't think they will be. She has not said this to me directly, but I know my daughter. She is not someone who forgets. She's not someone who holds grudges either. She's not built for it. But she knows what she saw in his face the day he agreed with his father. She knows what she learned about his loyalties when it actually counted. Their daughter asks about her father. My daughter handles this with a grace I genuinely admire. She lets the child love him. She does not poison that well. I raised her with a father who left, and I tried to do the same thing, tried to let her keep whatever she could of him, and I see her doing it now, and it is one of the most painful and most beautiful things I have ever watched. He does see the child. There are arrangements now through lawyers, the way these things go. It is not what any of us would have chosen. But children are resilient in ways that break your heart and also save you, and my granddaughter is thriving. She has opinions about everything, her snack, her socks, which book we read at night. She learned to pump her own legs on the swings in February and announced it to me with a satisfaction so total and complete that I nearly cried on the spot. This spring, my daughter found an apartment, a 2-bedroom in Mount Pleasant, good light, old building with decent bones. She put down the first and last herself. She called me when she signed the lease and she said, "Mom, I did it." I said, "I know. I knew you would." She said, "I don't think I would have gotten here without you." I thought about what to say. I thought about how much I could tell her, about the lawyers, about the accountant, about the phone calls I made in November and December. About all of it. I said, "You got yourself here. I just made sure the road was clear." There is a version of this story where I am the hero of it, where I swooped in and fought the battle and everything turned out right because I was clever and resourceful and refused to let it go. But the real version is messier and slower and involves a lot of sitting in kitchens drinking tea and not knowing how things would end. It involves a daughter who was braver than she gave herself credit for, who held on to every document, who got herself a new job, who picked up her child every day and made dinner and kept going. It involves a little girl who learned to pump her own legs. I did what I could do. I opened the door and I let them in, and I picked up the phone and I didn't stop. That's all any of us can do, in the end. You hold the door. You make the call. You stand in the rain on your own back porch in March and you let yourself feel it, all of it, before you go back inside. And then you go back inside.